What I got with me is lantern, punch, my watch, schedule, tickets. But when I'm sitting here in the station, I am under the orders of the station master here. I cannot move my train until the station master tells me, hey, you can move your train. We got all the paying passengers on board, all the baggage is on board, all the less than carload packages, the baggage, the mail, it's all on board the train. You can now leave. At that point, I, the conductor, is in charge of the train, and I, the conductor, can now tell the engineer it's safe to leave the station. We're in pre-radio days. I do that either by using my kerosene lantern. By the way, you notice it's got a large, so I can put it over my arm. Or in the days we're talking about, we're using a battery powered. Once again, it goes over my arm, so my arm is free. On board the railroad, 3 of your extremities belongs to the railroad, 1 belongs to you. I mean, the other way around. 3 belongs to you, 1 belongs to the railroad. So that's why I can grab hold of things of that. So it has 2 bulbs in. 1 bulb lights up, it's a floodlight. The other one is a directional light for signaling. The other thing I have is my punch. I have to punch all tickets. Hey, you, I know who you are. You're one of the guys from corporate headquarters. You've come on board the train and you're trying to see whether I punch all the tickets or not. Oh, it's even worse. You tell me that you're a railroad employee and you lost your pass, and would I please let you ride on board the train free against the rules? I could get fired. I said to you, by the way, what time is it? And you said to me, 2:45. At which point I threw you off the train because I knew you were a liar. Why? Because if you're a railroad man, you would have said 3:45. All time is giving in hours and minutes, not half past or quarter of that. My punch is handed to me by the railroad. Every conductor's got his individual punch with an individual design in it when you punch the tickets. You can take that ticket and you can have a complaint against me. You can go to the railroad and show the ticket, and they will match that punch up against a board, and they will know it was me who did that punching on the ticket. I have on my thing, my service stripes. I would never have been a conductor on board a train with just these stripes. I would have had a star or 2 above it. My other thing is, I have my timetable I must carry with me. I have with me some ticket stubs, but most importantly, I have my watch. An open face watch cannot have a cover on it. It's got to be 16 jewel. Cannot lose more than 3 seconds a week. And by the way, I forgot to mention, I came in this station and I compared this watch to this station watch. I compare it all the time. Before we started the train now, I got my engineer, fireman, and assistant conductor together, and Pullman conductor. Pullman are separate people from the railroad. And we compared our watch to make sure they were the same. No metal protection on it because the railroad's afraid that when I push that to pop it open, I may change the time. This is inspected every 6 months by a licensed railroad watch inspector to make sure it works. So we are heavily regulated. The railroads developed out of military personnel. The first people who are running the railroads are generally ex-military people, and they brought the military rules to the railroad. It's a safety way to keep things going along the way. Railroads are still the same way today. The other thing I need to mention, I think, is that they can work me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Whoa. You know, a pig, a hog, they got to stop the train every 16 hours to leave it off to water it and feed it. Thank God in 1910, the Congress passed a law, the hog law, for us railroad guys. We can only work 16 hours a day and then we got to have 8 hours off. They've changed that a little bit lately. It's now down to 12 hours. And you will hear people say, the engineer died. He hogged. Well, what happened was he was on the job for 12 hours and He got caught. He can't run it any longer. He runs the train more than 12 hours, the federal government's going to arrest him, not the railroad. It's also called he's dogged. You dog a door shut, he's shut, he can't do. And they sent out the dog catcher, the crew cab, to bring a relief crew to catch him. So if you ever hear somebody say the crew died, you know what happened. Hours of service came up, and they sent out a crew to get him with the dog catcher.
Day of the week of the year.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. This is much like
that the conductor would dread having to work at the station.
Yeah, this is that time. He's got one assistant, maybe two assistant conductors spread out along the train, and he's checking with his assistant conductors to make sure that they got their cars buttoned up, the doors closed, everybody's on board. So once he gets a signal from all his assistant conductors, then he tells the engineer, yes, we can leave the station. It is a very regulated service. And then, of course, he's dealing with the Pullman conductor, who the Pullman company is a separate company. Basically, African Americans being used. And one of the more interesting things is the Pullman conductor was always called George. This apparently is very detrimental within the African American community to be called George on account of this. But it was one of those things in American culture that you can't understand why the Pullman conductor just became known as George. It's just one of those strange little stories.
So you think trains have a bright future, or will there always be trains as long as there's people around?
I think there will always be trains. Yeah, heavily territory, heavy, I'm back up. Yes, I think there will always be trains. In territory, we got lots of people along like the Northeast Corridor, Chicago, California. You can move lots of people and everything. You run into problems in places like Kentucky, where the population's spread out. We got good highways for moving people. You don't have that. And then for long distance movement, they'd rather go to the airport. I don't know the real solution to it. I would love to see them put back in a Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland train. I think that would be an interesting train to run. I think what we really need is the Cardinal, which is the train that now runs from New York to Washington to Huntington to Cincinnati to Chicago, runs every other day except on Sunday. It really ought to be a daily train running back and forth because it's so inconvenient to move on it. You leave Ashland to come to Cincinnati, well, you got to plan what day am I going to go home, and is the train going to be running on that day? Trains ought to run every day of the week. It shouldn't be trains that run every other day, but that's the way the federal government has funded Amtrak, and it's a strange world out there.
Well, that leads into my next question. Is there a reason why modern trains and modern train systems are more successful in Europe than they are here in Asia?
I don't know whether they're more successful in Europe or not, if you want to put it that way, but they are heavily subsidized. And then your population in Europe is much more dense and concentrated. So what you're running really is trains, high-speed trains from Paris to Marseille, or Paris to Berlin, or London to Paris. I'm just picking on Paris. But you're running high-speed trains. We don't have any high-speed trains in the United States. We used to have high-speed trains. Back before there was Amtrak, we had high-speed trains. Track in the United States, I'm getting off the side, is track 1, grade class 1, is passenger trains 15 miles per hour, freight trains 10 miles per hour. The highest speed you can go in the United States is 79 miles, correct, 79 miles per hour. That's what we build our tracks to move freight. They're not built to passengers. Europe is the opposite. They build their rails to move passengers, not freight. Freight's a secondary thing. We do it reverse in this country. So if you can't run passenger trains faster than 79 miles per hour, it's kind of hard to compete. So that's our problem in this country. If we're going to do fast passenger trains, we're going to have to go out and build the track. Just think of the track here in Kenton County. You go out here, and we got grade crossing, not in Covington, but you go out towards, I want to say Park Hills, but not Taylor Mill. We got on-grade crossings. You can't go running trains at 120 miles per hour down track like that, where you got a crossing where you're driving on your automobile coming up. It just doesn't work. You got enough problems running 79 mile per hour train on there on grade crossing, because you Americans are always going to try to beat the train to the crossing, whether you should or not, and that's why we wind up with all these collisions out there. Around the railroad tracks, expect a train at any time from any direction, and always look and listen when you pull up the track to make sure there's no train coming. The train is bigger than you. The relation of a train to a person is a relationship of a person, train to a car. The relationship between a train and a car is the same relation between a person and a Pepsi Cola can. I'll use Pepsi Cola. You step on the Pepsi Cola can, you crush it, right? It's the same weight relation. When the train hits the car, it's the same thing. So around the railroad tracks, look and listen. Step back from the Okay, Charles Bogart. Hey, I grew up in Newport, Kentucky on Oak Street. I could look out my back window and see the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway running through town. Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, not railroad. The Louisville-Nashville was the railroad who ran down Saratoga, and I went to school at St. Stephen's at 9th and Saratoga. So I could look out my classroom window and see the Louisville-Nashville Railroad run by. Don't ask me why the railroads have fascinated me since I was a kid. And then I discovered as a kid the Newport Depot up at 10th and 11th and Mama Street. And that was a favorite place to hang out. Those people nowadays would all be thrown in jail because they allow a young kid like me, first, second, third, fourth grade like that, to come out, hang at the depot, go up at NX Tire, hand up messages to locomotive. I mean, it was, thinking back in those days, it's sort of crazy, but by golly, I'm glad I got to do it. Kids nowadays miss a whole lot of experiences. They just play with their phones. They don't get to do the real stuff.
So let's go. Can you tell us why they would do something like that?
Okay, what had happened was we have, I'm going to call it the Louisville-Nashville Railroad. Actually, we're going back farther. The Covington and Lexington Railroad, built from Covington to Lexington, shortly before the Civil War. It goes through a number of reorganizations and becomes part of the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. The Louisville-Nashville Railroad is coming up to Covington. Oh, you people in Covington, they're going to bridge the river to go to Cincinnati. No, you don't want that. So they go and build the railroad track down through Newport, down through Saratoga to get to Cincinnati. In the 1880s, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway reaches Covington and does do the bridge across the river, the Brent, not the Brent Spence, the name for the journalist whose name I can't come up with right now. Now the CSX bridge over the river and that. So they need a station, both the Louisville, Nashville, and the Chesapeake and Ohio. They have, in the 1930s, they raised the on-street grade level to the upper grade level that we now know in Covington, where you drive underneath the railroad tracks. And they built this depot. It's built by the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, but the Louisville and Nashville Railroad is also going to use it, and they have put Cincinnati Union Terminal in, cut. Before this, the Louisville and Nashville used the Pennsylvania Terminal at the end of the, I'll call it the L&N Bridge, now the Purple Peak Weeders Bridge, or whatever you want to call it today. And the C&O station was at 3rd and Pearl. And then they all moved up to Cincinnati Union Terminal, now Cincinnati Museum Center. So that was the move. They built this, and since they got it up high, they built it at street level, and they got to put these stairways and elevators to get you up to where the track is. So that's why we wind up with this sort of a strange station that looks more for New York than for Covington, because it's a tri-level station to get up to the track level. It's a very interesting station. The Chesapeake and Ohio, Louisville, Nashville run their trains through here. up through 1971, when the railroads get out of the business and Amtrak takes over. And Amtrak, in their wisdom, decided that Covington wasn't worth stopping at, and they run through Newport and Covington all the way over to Cut, and then park their trains at Cut and offload there. So Covington lost its last passenger train service in 1971.
This place on a normal day.
This was a passenger station, but it was also a station for moving head-end less than carload loads. Okay, today we got UPS, we got Amazon, we got FedEx. Back in those days, we had Railway Express. Railway Express was the way you moved small packages from town to town. This was a place to load it on what was called the head end. You ever notice a passenger train? It's got in the front of the train baggage cars, railway post office car, and express cars. Baggage car was, of course, where you put the baggage for the passengers. But we had all these other cars at the front that's moving freight. They're moving the packages that now UPS moves, and they're moving US mail. And they are loading that here. Mail is being brought here to put on the train. Packages are being brought here to put on the train. You bought a package and you're going to send it to Corbin, Kentucky. Railway Express Agency came to your house, picked it up, or your business, brought it here, put it on the train, it goes to Corbin, offloaded, and Railroad Express delivers it to your house. One of the things you got to understand is the railroads never made money off of passengers. Passengers were always a losing proposition. They made their money off the head end. Railway Express Agency, a U.S. Post Office service, moving mail. When they lost the U.S. Post Office contracts and the post office went to the zip codes, and now you had all this sorting done at large centers, and you're moving it by trucks, they lost really the money that kept the trains running. At the same time, Railway Express Agency is going down the tube because UPS and FedEx had come along and they're moving stuff by airplane. So the profit that they made on the railroad, moving passengers, which wasn't a profit, it was moving the stuff at the front, once that's gone, they're not making any money. So that's why they get out of bed. Amtrak today is in the same thing. I hate to say it's impossible for them to make money, but it's almost impossible for them to make money. And I hate the word subsidy. You know, we subsidize the airlines. They don't own the airport, right? We, the taxpayers, build the airport for them. So we give grants to airlines for their stuff. Instead of calling a subsidy to Amtrak, we should say maybe we give them a grant every year to cover the costs that aren't quite covered. It's just like Tank. Tank doesn't cover its whole cost. We provide a subsidy to it. All public transportation, it's the same way. Airlines, we provide subsidies to. Anybody that moves passengers, they get some sort of subsidy simply because we, the citizens, don't want to pay the full price for doing it. Even as people who drive cars, we're subsidized, you know. Our taxes pay for the streets in front of our houses. We don't, okay, I got off on it, but that's a little part.
You're fine. Okay, so let's help the viewers understand about what it would have been like back in the day, standing where we're standing.
Well,
we're on the Western Hallway, which serviced the Southern train, right?
Yeah, the trains here would have been the Louisville-Nashville Railroad running south to Latonia, where they would have split. The one train continuing on down towards Corbin, on to Knoxville and Atlanta, on to Florida. The other train going to Latonia, swinging west to Louisville, where it would have then gone on down to Nashville and New Orleans or to Pensacola. The C&O train coming through here would have swung east towards Ashland, picking up at Ashland, by the way, a section that came down from Toledo and Detroit, taking that on, picking up some section coming out of Louisville, came over, heading on over to Charlotte, where it would split to where I said, to Newport News and to Washington, D.C. So we're running out of here in the heyday, 20-some passenger trains a day, moving people and that through here. a lot of the people are coming to Covington instead of going all the way over to Cincinnati. This is a little bit more convenient for northern Kentucky people to go to Cincinnati. We are also, as they're sitting here loading the passengers on, well, the elevators collapsed over here, but we got 2 elevator shafts here. And this is where the mail and the packages and your luggage is all being taken up there to be put on that front end of the train. So the front end of the train, we're loading the packages, our baggage, our luggage, and the U.S. mail upon. There's most probably dropping a few packages off, some mail off, being brought down. I doubt if we've dropped any passengers off, because we got a major problem here. And I'm going to talk Jim Crow for a second. Jim Crow is a law in Kentucky, separate coach law and everything. African Americans cannot ride in the same coach as white people. So it's a major problem in that. So what happens is, and I want you to think about this. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway used to run a train from Newport News all the way to Chicago, and from Chicago all the way back to Newport News. So you, the African American, gets on the train in Chicago, sits wherever he wants to, gets to Cincinnati, and I, the conductor, now must walk up to him and say, "Sir, you can't sit in this car anymore. You got to go that car back there." By the way, if he doesn't do it, it isn't the railroad that gets arrested. It's me, the conductor, that gets arrested, fined, and put in jail by the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I mean, this is a major hassle that goes on. And what you find out is that all the railroads coming from the north terminate their trains in Cincinnati. You got to get off the train, and you got to go and walk over on the other train. As you get on the other train, the conductor, okay, African American back here, white people up here, we keep them separate, and it's not the hassle that you have to go through moving them apart. So basically, all the trains leaving Cincinnati is a new train. We're not doing run-through trains due to this problem.
I guess you could call it the middle section, or the middle lift. So tell us about why we're standing here, and how busy was this thing, and how did it work?
Okay. As I said, we're at street level. The track is some 20, 30 feet above us up here. So to move the stuff up, your luggage of your passengers, the LCL, less than carload stuff, the packages that UPS moves and everything, and your U.S. mail, you had an elevator here to move things up. By the way, we don't have ADA back in those days. Maybe they did move a few people in wheelchairs, but basically people like that don't travel on the trains because the trains aren't equipped for them. So these elevators are being used for moving packages and luggage and mail up the upper, and to bring it back down. So this is an important part of this station here. Unlike the other stations in Kentucky, depots I should say, who don't need it because you're at ground level. By the way, I think I should mention this thing. A depot is a building. A station is a place on the timetable which may or may not have a depot. So you can have a station which doesn't have a depot, but the depot is always at a station. So what we have here is the Covington Depot, Covington Union Depot, by the way, because we had 2 railroads calling here. So this is the elevator that we're using to move that heavy stuff from the ground level up to the train and bring it from the train back down.
So there's is this an engine room or control room, or what do we have? Did someone work over here? What was this room for?
Yeah, that is, I remember, it was the mechanical room that provided the power to move this equipment up and down. We could get a long term about electricity and all this sort of stuff. But anyway, you had to have a separate room for doing this. The modern world is so different with the way electricity is supplied to houses, equipment moves and everything. It'd be a long discussion. But anyway, we have a separate power room over there where they're most probably changing the voltage in that to make it compatible with the elevators that they have moved in to these places. This was most probably mechanically at first, and then we add electricity to it to move it.
So was there big freight, heavy freight? How much do you think these things could lift? Maybe a ton or 2 tons or?
I would imagine these things could have moved at least a ton. Okay, we're just thinking about what we got doing is we got to have a baggage car, and we're pulling the baggage car down, turning it, moving it in on this elevator. That's why it's long and deep to get that baggage car on. This goes up, and then the baggage car is pulled up to the head end part of the train to either load or offload. Oh, hey, I forgot to mention one of the things that does go on, which is really sort of weird, is that we're moving coffins. You have had somebody die here who came to town, and they're from, I don't know, Atlanta, let's say. They've been treated, put in a casket, and the casket's been brought down and loaded upon the train. This is a fairly common thing that happened, and they had a different baggage cart for this that was a wee bit higher so that you could actually just slide the casket directly on board. One of the other things we're moving is live animals, not pigs and that, but chickens, dogs, and cats. Smaller animals are being moved this way also onto the baggage car. So you got to think of a whole broad range of things that are being moved up and down upon this train to go places. And of course, the main thing is your U.S. mail to move out and to get where it goes. U.S. mail, believe it or not, at one time could move a piece of mail 500 miles in one day. You mailed a letter in the morning, and the next day the person should have had it at their house. It was even common for people, you had mail delivery twice a day at your home back in those days. So it was common for people in the morning to mail a postcard, the emails of the day, get it to your house by that afternoon, or maybe that morning, and a reply get back in the day. So you could have sent a postcard from here to Independence, Kentucky, and got a reply back in the day, thanks to the railway post office service that was going on. And that would all been moving up and down by this elevator.
I've got one